I think a lot of brands play it safe because they don't want downside. And the most dangerous thing you can do, in my opinion, is play it safe.
Our guest today is a reformed journalist that now builds quote unquote boring businesses, not really that boring, but boring businesses to make serious bank. She's a board member, an investor, founder, creator, probably a million other things that I don't know about as well. This person's also built up a massive audience online. That includes about 140K followers on Twitter, 260K on Instagram, 850 plus on TikTok. So congrats on almost passing the million mark there. And today she's going to school us on how to find the perfect audience when you're building a brand, which is something that she's done across a bunch of platforms. So we're excited to welcome Codie Sanchez to the show. And first and foremost, I want to take us back to your roots a little bit. Do you remember the first time you had that thought of, oh, I should start creating content? What jump-started that thought for you?
Time and space, actually. I think ideas for content need room to breathe, kind of like a plant. And so I think there was a huge proliferation of us in 2020, like January of 2020. A lot of people that I know that are now big on the internet, basically, we were doing other things. I was investing in private companies at the time. I was running all over the country and the world, raising money, looking at deals. And in 2020, I couldn't travel anymore. And so I was like, well, I'm an anxious little hominoid. And so what am I going to do in my spare time? Because I'm, stuck sort of more inside than I've ever been. And so I started writing, which I love to do. And then writing also turned into getting really interested in gamifying some of these platforms, thinking about, if I have certain opinions and I want to share them with the world, what's the best way to do it on every platform that's out there? And so the only reason I started creating content was that the world slowed down and I had space.
I love that. I mean, would you consider right now that you're still really enjoying it? Are you still in a place where you love it, you want to do it every single day, or has any part of it become a chore for you?
Every business has downsides. Now that this is an actual business with employees and contractors and P&Ls and expenses, the part that I never love about running any business is, what's the accounting look like today? How are we doing on a revenue basis? What are our gross margins? And like getting really nitty gritty into the details of the finances is never my favorite thing, despite being a financial investor. So certainly that. But when it comes to actually creating content and the space and room to do it, yeah, I love it. I mean, I used to think when I was younger, wouldn't that be cool if you got paid to think and speak for a living? Like, that'd be wild. Nobody does that, really. And it turns out that now a lot of people do. And so I used to spend all of my time diving into spreadsheets and, dealing with really hairy things with companies, lawsuits, and if they're going public and activist takeovers. And if you compare that to doing a TikTok, yeah, it's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's wild how everything's changed so rapidly. I never in a million years thought that I'd get to do any of this stuff for a career. I thought I had to be a lawyer or something growing up. People always told me I'd be a great lawyer, really good at arguing, really good at talking my way out of stuff. I don't want to be a lawyer. So when this started becoming clear that this could be a path, I jumped right on it. And then I personally just sucked at writing for like 8 years after, because I was really good at school writing and talking in a way that was a little bit more school focused. But I had to unlearn a lot of that stuff. Maybe for you, what were the skills that you relied on up front to kind of get your groove and get going?
Yeah. So I was a journalist first before I did anything in finance. So I think I knew a thing or two about writing. That said, I know about words and I like words and I probably use too many of them. So the part that I really had to learn was, what does it mean to write for a viral audience? If actually I care about a lot of people hearing what I'm saying, then you have to change the way that you write and speak. So I think the hardest part that I had was some of the stuff that our friends Sam and Sean talk about, Sam Parr and Sean Puri talk about, which is, that the hook in anything you do is everything in this attention economy. Literally almost nothing else that you do is more important than the initial hook I found on every single platform. And so obsessing about the hook that is the subject line, about the hook that is the first tweet, about the hook that is the first line in a blog post, whatever it may be. Can I get really obsessed with the one thing that is going to grab their attention from the world of noise and into my narrative? And so that I really had to learn. And that's not a skill set that I have. If you've ever read a financial report, you know how horribly good at being boring we are. And so, I could put together a very lengthy piece, but learning to shorten it and to get it into the attention economy was totally new for me. And when I actually think about what I find most interesting, I really like long books. I like long roaming thoughts. I listen to a ton of podcasts. I watch a lot of long form content. My blog is quite long if you read it. And so I have to balance that. For TikTok, there's no nuance. Nuance is dead. There's zero of it. And so you have to balance this need for virality with the need for retention, nuance, and interesting conversations. And that's actually quite hard for me. I have to work hard at that.
There's a lot going on for content creators. And one thought that you kind of brought up there is the idea of hooks appealing to a more viral audience, which kind of denotes there's a mass appeal audience, but there's also more specific audiences. When you were just starting out, or maybe if you were giving advice to yourself now, knowing what you know, would you have tried for mass appeal up front? And what would that audience look like? Or do you think going more specific is probably the route to go? Which camp do you fall in?
I think you go niche first, riches and niches. And the reason is because for normal humans like you and I'm no Elon Musk. I am not a Bill Gates. I've done a few things that I think are marginally interesting. But when you compare me to the broader based world, nobody really cares what Codie's daily routine is, especially 2 years ago. Could care less. Nobody cares about my philosophical bents and how brilliant I am in my short little pithy tweets. Nobody cares because that's generalistic thoughts that is not moded or unique or interesting. And so I think when we really started growing is when I tapped into what is my unique expertise and angle, and can I apply interesting writing or communicating to that. And so at the time, not very many people were talking about boring businesses. Now I kind of like chuckle because now every day I see like, here's how to get to your first 500K by buying a business. I'm like, have you bought a business? No, you haven't? Okay, but it's cool because it's gotten into the zeitgeist a little bit, right? But back then, like nobody really was talking about M&A in an interesting way at scale. And so, we have another person that I think we both know on the internet, Nick Huber, who does a really good job with super niche self-storage. So I went super niche business acquisition because that's what I know. And then I applied an interesting, I think, framework on top of it so most people could understand what I was talking about. And now I go broader because I think what happens next is you hit. So if we say right now we're at like 1.5 million followers across social platforms. What happens, I think, when you start getting to, let's call it 100, 200K on Twitter or a couple 100,000 broadly, like how many people really want to know how to buy a plumbing company in this country? Like it's probably not millions of people. And so, at some point, those niches, I think you get to a little bit of a ceiling in them and you have to expand past them for your total audience growth. I actually think you can build almost an infinitely scalable business monetarily and revenue wise inside a small niche if all you care about is money. But if you care about eyeballs, then you go more broadly later. So I think it's like a reverse funnel, super tight up top and then broaden as you grow.
And you had mentioned there that when you were starting out, you go a little bit more niche, talk about acquisition. And then at a certain point, you want to get bigger, so you have to go broader appeal. Do you feel like you've had to change anything with your actual work to basically make sure that you have the content to support a broader appeal? Or is it just a matter of identifying stuff you're already doing?
I think it's a matter of, I've always felt like you should follow your curiosity. And so when I follow my curiosity and I actually write about the stuff that I think is interesting and the conversations that I have that I think are interesting, what I found is there's 300 million Americans. And so there's going to be some segment of the population that also thinks those things are interesting. If what you're doing is like chasing what you think is trendy, I think you fail a lot. But most of the times when I write something that goes quote unquote viral, it's because it's like, I had this really interesting conversation. I have something called my gospel that basically I write down every single interesting conversation I have, what are the main bullets on it? I kind of go back through it occasionally when I think about, some stuff I'm struggling with. And so when I have a great conversation with Blake, like after this, I'll sit down and write, here are like the 3 things I heard from Blake that I thought were really interesting, or here are the 10 things I thought. And then if I found that interesting enough, I usually think there will be an audience that's broad enough for it. And so I share that with the world. That's one of my content strategies. I don't think you should go and change what you do on a daily basis, except maybe if you're trying to go super viral. Like we'll probably play around with challenges and with, like adventures and things like that, especially on YouTube to grow. And that would be something I would not do normally. I'd just be over here buying businesses, growing them, whatever. But if, say, we have a goal, like I have a goal, we want our business to be 5 million people in our audience by the end of the year. I want us to have a 50 million person audience by the end of the next 3 years. I want us to create 100,000 small business owners, and I want us to free financially 1 million people, meaning they have income streams that cover their expenses above and beyond. And so if I want to grow to that level, I'm going to have to do something different. But if you want to grow to your first a couple 100,000, I don't think you need to do that. Just be you, apply interesting hooks, do it in your niche, and repeat.
Yeah. And again, easier said than done. We're talking to somebody that's done an amazing job of building an audience and doing it rapidly. It's a lot of work, I'm sure, as you'll attest as well. But the more specific you can be, the more value you can provide directly to that audience, obviously the better. But I want to go to the idea of building an audience or finding the right audience before you're even building for them, actually finding these people. So I want to start off with maybe a hot take and then a follow-up question on this. So my hot take is that the way that we look at an audience is kind of, we usually just look for a persona. And I don't really believe that personas work that well.
Interesting.
Do you think that that's wrong? And when I say audience, if you had to write down on paper who your audience is that a persona? Is that like the community where people live in? What does that look like for you? How would you define the term?
Mine is always a real human. It starts out with me. Would I, if I read this, think it was interesting? If it did not have my name on it, if I wasn't involved in it, would I spend my time reading this thing? Because I think you know you better than anybody else. So what steals your attention? And if it steals your attention, then it will probably do it for other people. And then the second thing, it was somebody famous, I can't remember who, maybe it was Tim Ferriss, said, write like you're writing to a friend every time you're writing. And so I think people get really clever with like, this is Beth and she's a mom and she loves pink and she plays with ponies,
exactly.
And you're like, who the fuck's Beth? What is this? And instead I would probably say something like, I would like my friend, let's say Rob Abasolo, his name's Robuilt. He's a person on the internet too. I would like Rob to like the stuff that we're saying. Like, I want Rob to think this is interesting. And I know Rob pretty well. So like, if I showed him this stuff, would he get engaged by it? Because he's at the highest caliber, right? He's got a ton of noise coming at him. He's super busy. He's seen a lot of stuff. He's got a keen eye as a creator. Would he think it was interesting? And so I think pick some of your friends. And, the other thing I think is important that I've stumbled on multiple times is I will try to go too viral. And usually to go really viral, it means you have to go really simple and sometimes like not to my, this is such a cheesy word, but highest self. So I'll go too low level, right? And what I find does better is speak to your highest common denominator, actually. And so I try to talk, especially on Twitter, to like, would Blake think this is interesting? Would Sam and Sean, would Nick Huber, would some of my big other creator funds think this was useful piece of information? And that stuff usually goes viral. And then the stuff that's like how to do X with Y goes viral, but has really bad form from a retention standpoint, because then people start to be like, it's kind of clickbaity. And nobody really likes that.
Yeah, and virality can tend to be quite overrated, especially if you're treating it like you're just saying where you're just going for simplicity, mass appeal at all costs, whereas you can go semi-viral or even viral and have it actually be super impactful if it's really tactical, really kind of more step-by-step knowledge focused. But reaching, so going back to your start with your audience, I'm sure that looking back, maybe when you started creating content, there are probably things now that you look back and say, I wish I would have done that a little bit differently. There are probably also people that you consult or that you just see doing stuff online where you're like, I would never do that. Do you have examples of bad practices for trying to pick your audience up front?
Oh, yeah. God, I mean, could you imagine what we're going to think of ourselves in like 10 years? I'm going to look back at some of my stuff and be like, oh,
cringe.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, my grandchildren are going to see this. So 100% that'll happen. But the truth of it is, I have a belief that at the end of the day, nothing that we do really matters. We're a speck of sand on 1,000,001 beaches across the world, if not galaxy. And so I think the real problem comes when you take yourself too seriously. And I think a lot of people do this on the internet, and they start to believe that what we do really matters. And does this video really impact me? And that what that normally does is it stymies you from doing anything. That's the whole, perfection is the enemy of done. And so I don't let too much of this worry me, because I remember at the end of the day, nobody's going to die and nobody will remember this in 50 years, definitely not in 100 years. And so if people don't even remember who the pharaohs were, why does it matter what we are? And so I think probably some of my existentialism and the fact that, I'm sort of this agnostic person means that I don't stress too much about stuff that's happening on the internet. I do not, where it can get really dangerous, I think, is when you associate your self-worth with stuff that's happening online. I've really tried to divorce the two. It's just a business. It's just a fun business of creating and gamifying things online that has nothing to do with Codie as a human. Once your face is on all your content, my face is on all my content. And so then when people are like, you suck, you're the this of this, you're full of it. If you don't divorce the two, those things can be hurtful. And so I try to remind myself constantly, and don't get me wrong, sometimes it gets to me, that this doesn't really matter. None of this matters at the end of the day. That said, I have a rule, for instance, like I'm a 35-year-old, former investment banker, financial analyst. Like, I do not dance on TikTok. Rule number 1, no dancing. And so I remember my team had me, I don't know if you remember, like it was like a TikTok video where like you kind of did this and like you leaned back and everybody was doing it over different things. And my team asked me to do it once and I was like, ugh, and I did it and I sent it to them and I was like, we're never doing this again. This is horrifying and it's not at all my best and highest use. I'm not an actress. And so I'm certainly not a dancer. So anyway, so that's one, is like no dancing. And I did one dance video somewhere on the internet. I'm sure you can find it. It's horrifying. And then the second thing that we've done a few times that I don't love is so once you get to a big enough level, you have other people that help you create things, right? And so I certainly can't write. I don't upload all my blogs, for instance. Like I write them and then somebody edits them and uploads it for me. I now write all of my tweets, but I have somebody else who helps me synthesize ideas, edits and grammatically corrects them. And they also might write one that's like for a webinar that we're going to do, or they might write one for a lead magnet that we're going to put out there because we try to get emails all the time for Contrarian Thinking, our newsletter company that we are growing. And one of our newsletter magnets like still bothers me. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something to the tune of like, the quickest way to 500K in revenue, is to buy a mobile home park or something like that. And it was like really cute and pithy and it went super viral. And then I saw it and I was like, oh, this is not really where I'd go. Now, what my team argued is what we delivered, which was this, sort of playbook on how to invest in mobile home parks was really good because I had reviewed that. But the tweet just felt off brand. And so that's going to happen all the time, just like in any company. And I think you keep moving forward on it regardless. And the last thing I'll say is like, every single creator I know has people that support them. There are no big creators out there that are one-man shows. Like the most notorious would be Jack Butcher. And like, I've talked to Jack multiple times. He has his wife, he has a couple VAs, he has other people that he utilizes. And so, you're going to have to rely on other people. And when you do that, you will at some point have something that you probably wouldn't have said exactly like that. But the only way to really grow something cool and have a massive impact, in my opinion, is to bring others along with you. You just can't do it by yourself.
Yeah, it can be scary to give up that control, but published over perfection is always the right way to go. So I'm on board. I personally have 0 people that have ever helped me with my stuff, and I really need it. But I'll get to that point. I'm not quite as big as you and some of these other people yet, so maybe we'll get there someday. But looking back now, so right when you started, maybe you could give us a one sentence, like a one-liner of how you would define your audience right when you started, and then you could do the same thing for right where you're at now. So maybe we could see some contrast there.
The one-liner when I started it was during the pandemic. And so it was humans who want to question things. I felt like there was a lot going on that I didn't agree with, and that we were losing the ability to question, that questions were being seen as some sort of assault. And the whole reason I started it is, as a journalist, our number one rule is question everything. And so that's how we started the blog. Anybody who wanted to question things, I wanted to communicate with. And now our line is humans that obsess on building their bank accounts and challenging their minds. So we look to free minds and build bank accounts. And so we want humans who believe that sort of same thing, that if you're financially free, then you can be philosophically free in your mind. And we want people who are interested in those two things.
So were you not focusing as much on the financial side of it up front then, and that's been added on more so, or is it just not as big of a part?
Yeah, 0 in the beginning. Zero about finance. In the
what
beginning,
made you
it was
decide to like add that on? What was the data that convinced you?
Money is a Trojan horse to changing thinking. And so if you think about it, what does everybody want? Everybody all around the world, until you've achieved pretty massive levels of success, they want to become financially free. They want to get richer. They want the safety that comes with money to climb up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so the reason we started talking about money is because it helps people get to a space where they can actually become free philosophically, in my mind. So a lot, it would be, Ryan Holiday would disagree with me. He would say, Stoics start from the base, first principles of free your mind first, and then everything else comes. And I would say, well, the Stoics were the great thinkers of history. They were not the average humans. And in fact, Stoicism was not very interesting to the masses back in those days. It was incredibly elitist. And so I actually think that most people need to feel comfortable enough to pay their rent. They need to feel comfortable enough that their family's okay. And then they might feel comfortable to think about how could they free their minds? Could they question the right things? Could they assert their views and wills upon the world? And so money's a Trojan horse. We bring you in talking about financial freedom, and then we help you move past financial freedom to think about actually freeing your mind, which at the end of the day, the only reason we want money is because we think it'll make us happy and safe. And so it's just one step in the ladder.
When you were looking for those people up front that were more just, you were focusing really on people that wanted to question things. So when you were trying to find those people when you were just getting started, did you have any go-to communities or places where you felt like they were huddling online?
Well, first, I went to centers of influence in my network first. So I think the best place to start is always with who you know. And so I went to some of the people that I thought were my most interesting friends, my most introspective friends. And I basically said, I want to have a conversation with humans, and we're all in lockdown and I can't see any of you guys. So I'm going to start this blog, and the blog is going to have a pretty massive comments back and forth section. And I like us to discuss things, or you to reply to the emails and tell me your thoughts on these more controversial subjects that I'm going to send around. And so we did that for 6 or 12 months, probably 3 or 6 months. And basically, I just would send it to friends that I thought were interesting, and they would send it to other friends, and the topics would be, pretty raw. And so that was the first way that I grew. And then I started finding micro groups that I thought also were interested in questioning narratives. And so lots of stuff on Reddit, lots of different Facebook groups. I find that entrepreneurs, by and large, are more interested in questioning things than other groups, because you have to be kind of crazy to become a founder. And so, then I got into groups like Trends, which is part of the Hustle. And I tried to find communities where there are lots of people striving, questioning things, and looking to grow. So
you've given us a good idea of your journey a little bit. If you were, let's say Fred, some random guy named Fred comes to you and is like, hey, I want to get some consultation on building my audience. First, I need to find him. what are maybe some of the questions that you would have Fred ask himself up front before even trying to worry about growing or anything like that, just specifically finding the right people to target?
Well, we actually have a newsletter course. You guys can check it out. I think if you go to Contrarian Thinking under courses, it should be there, of like how we grew to our first 100,000 subscribers and million in revenue. And in it, we have something called the 3Cs, which is basically, I would look for groups that have, it's cash, curious, and consistent. And so basically what you're looking for is, first, where is there a group of people who pay for something? Because I really think to be a content creator, you have to make money, because people don't understand how hard it is to create content consistently. It's a full-time job if you want to do it well. And so I think you have to start with monetization. You got to think about, I'm going to create content, but at some point it's going to get really hard. And so I need to have incentive alignment with pay in order for me to keep wanting to put my thoughts and self out on the internet. And so with cash, I basically tell people to look for groups where people are spending a certain amount on a subject. So let's say that Blake wants to talk about content creators. I would tell him to then go to Facebook, and I would look for a crowd of people. Is there somewhere where there's a Facebook group that has 50,000, 100,000 people all wanting to talk about content creators? Is there somewhere on Reddit that's like a subreddit that's basically 100,000 people that all want to talk about content creation? So, and then within that crowd, how much are they spending per year on this kind of stuff? And so, when it comes to, let's say, content creation, people are spending a lot of money. Like the educational content creation group is pretty large. I would imagine most people who are interested in the subject spend not hundreds, but thousands of dollars on content creators courses throughout the year. And that might be true with gardening. People spend thousands of dollars on gardening. In fact, gardening is one of the top 3 things that drives American modern humans' happiness. If you see the things that like makes people the happiest, gardening and being in nature are like up there at the top with romantic relationships. And so, can you find a group of people that's big enough? Can you find a group of people that pays enough money? And then are you curious enough to want to be consistent on posting on this thing, whatever platform you choose, for at least a year, at least once a week, if you're going to do a blog, and daily if you're going to do any other platform? And so if you are not interested enough to commit to it for a year on a daily or weekly basis, I think can it. If there's not an audience of people that are already interested in it, I say can it. And if there's not a group of people that are paying money for it, I say can it. For instance, like say you wanted your topic to be, what would be something people wouldn't spend money on? Like floor cleaning. I don't know. Say you're really into floor cleaning. Like probably there's not an audience of a ton of people that are crazy about floor cleaning. Like could you widen that slightly? Could be like ASMR for cleaning products in your home. Okay, that's interesting enough. People spend enough money on that. That might work.
It's interesting. You mentioned having enough cash to pay for stuff, make sure you're incentivized aligned there, and then also having an audience big enough. How big of an audience is big enough to justify it? I know that's all relative, I guess, to what the creator needs to make to monetize. But if you had a simple framework for just saying like, this is how big your audience needs to be to make this worth it to go for a whole year, what would you say?
Well, I think it's less how big the audience needs to be and more, can you tap into a big enough audience in as few as possible touches in a quick period. So like there's probably a lot of people that are interested in pheasant hunting across the US. Like if you built a business focused on pheasant hunting, you could probably make money. But is there a way for you to quickly tap into the people that care about pheasant hunting in order for you to make enough money up front to keep wanting to go? And so the way that I drive that is I think you need to find a group that has at least 50 to 100,000 people on Reddit or on Facebook or on some other platform where you can immediately go steal their audience because you don't have one yet. And that's why I like going to those communities and pulling their audience from them.
One thing that I liked as well, you said earlier, was how, given the 2 examples of what your audience definition would be when you started versus now, it's a little bit different. You've added a big thing on top of that. I imagine that probably happened to a lot of people, especially if they actually succeed with what they want to do and don't give up. So when that happens, first off, how often do you think that it's healthy for that to happen, where the audience changes a little bit? It's time to get a little bit broader. What's a good cadence for that?
I really think this is like a little woo-woo, so, bear with me. But I'm a big believer that energy transfers. And so the biggest reason why people follow creators is certainly the tactics that we have and the strategies and the expertise, but it's also the way we make people feel. And if you don't believe that, like think about how you feel after coming out of a movie, or how you feel after, watching a play. Like this is another form of entertainment. It's just more edutainment. And so I think you can change your subject a lot if you are super curious and engaged about that subject. Because people, if you're doing it right, people aren't following you just for the subject. They're following you because they like you as a human, or they like your brand as a brand. And so that's why Nike can be in 372 different things, from food to shoes to clothes to whatever. And it's why most brands can do that, or the best brands can do that, because they make you feel a certain way, and you feel a certain way when you put on their stuff, the same way when you watch a creator's stuff or listen to a creator's stuff. So in my business, that's happened. So it happened once in the beginning when we started adding money to the mix. It probably happened again because I wanted to start talking about more like growing businesses and leadership, and not just thinking and talking about money. So that was probably another time. I think it'll happen again because I want to talk about more stuff with health and lifestyle also on top of it. And so, that's 4 times in 2 years. And if you look at a lot of other providers, it's the same thing. I mean, you have Pomp, who started with Bitcoin, still talks about Bitcoin a lot, and cryptocurrency, but he's also added things like he's interested in the jobs board, which is ancillary to it. Now he has people on his podcast that talk about money overall. You have Mark Moss that actually started talking about YouTube, and then Mark transitioned from YouTube to talking about Bitcoin, and then Mark transitioned from Bitcoin to talking about personal sovereignty. And so I think that transition is actually really normal. I don't know many humans who are obsessed with one thing only for their entire life.
There are very few of that. I guess like James Clear kind of stays really true to the whole habits thing, which is one book that's massively successful. That's, a credit to him for being able to do that. But yeah, I think overall you evolve as a person, and if you get excited about something enough where you're learning all the time, it would kind of be foolish not to just start making things around what you're actively learning and what you're interested in. Because from what I've seen, if you're really focused on creating content just because you see an opportunity there, that's where you're in danger to burn out quick and quit. Whereas if you I really like talking about marketing, certain aspects of it, at least. I'm not like so on the paid side, but organic marketing, I could talk about that all the time. So it's not so hard for me to keep with that. But even then, little tweaks kind of need to happen over time, or you get a little bit bored with it. It's not, and if you're getting bored with it, rest assured that your audience is definitely getting bored with it, probably. So
100%.
Yeah. For you, in your experience, you've kind of done the personal brand and now the branding for businesses, and you've done content for a lot of different things. Maybe you could talk through some of the differences you see with talking to an audience through your personal brand versus talking to an audience through a normal business brand.
Yeah, well, we have our overarching company is Contrarian Thinking. And at Contrarian Thinking is where sort of all my personal brands lie. We're about to launch Contrarian Thinking Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, which will be intriguing. The part that I like about that is you get to have fun with it. So I try to do at this point in my life, I'm optimizing for fun. I've made a little bit of money. And so once I get to a certain level, it's like, what can my day look like so that I have very few shoulds and a lot more wants? And I want the arbitrage or the distance between the two to continue to decrease. And so when I think about building for brands, I try to look at who's doing it in a really fun way. For example, today, I was just talking about one of my content directors for TikTok. And I was like, look at Duolingo. They have like this ridiculous green bird. Have you seen this like parrot that they have all over TikTok, and it's doing all this funny stuff? So like, look at Duolingo, look at Scrub Daddy, which has like this, squishy thing that's like talking to you all the time. I'm like, look at, Morning Brew. And they have these, 2 humans that kind of go back and forth in this interview style. I think the cool part about a personal brand is you can come up with whatever style that you want. I mean, I really can't change much about me. Like, I'm me, and this is what I do, and this is how I sound, and whatever. I can mess with format, but maybe not as much. If I think about it from a brand standpoint, I can go blue ocean. So Contrarian Thinking, like, who is it? how would it be portrayed? If you were going to engage with a contrarian, what would that look like? You could go to like, the Indian couple where the guy's head is always like a emoticon or an emoji or whatever, and his wife, he's always making these funny jokes at his wife, or he's never in it, but it's POV to her, and he's saying ridiculous things to her all the time. So I like to look at different types of content that are totally distinct from what I would create, and then I think about, all right, if I was to apply all of these different zany ideas to contrarian thinking, what would that look like? And with brands, you have wide open strategy for that. I think a lot of brands play it safe because they don't want downside. And the most dangerous thing you can do, in my opinion, is play it safe. So that's what I don't want to do with contrarian thinking. We're going to try some crazy stuff because it's not my face.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to go into next, is the playing it safe thing, because that's what most people are going to do. You could argue that's riskier than just playing it safe, but playing it safe is riskier than taking the risk. But for those boring brands, if you were consulting them, what would you say? How would you just like slap them around and tell them to change things? Because it's widespread. I would say it's more than 95% of companies are not willing to do anything. What are the actual risks?
Well, I think the biggest risk for all of us is we're scared of rejection on a mass scale, right? A lot of people say they're afraid of cancellation, but I don't really think that's it. I think people are afraid of a tree falling in the woods and nobody hearing it. I think they're afraid of, what if we do all of this stuff and everybody ignores us, or if we look silly, or if people make fun of us online. And again, if you're able to divorce, the fun that you have with marketing from the value you have as a brand, or from the fun you have as a personal brand online, from who you are as a human, you worry less about this. So you're in marketing, you know this much better than I, but I look at some of the brands that had fun in the beginning too. Like Wendy's, before every brand thought it was funny to be like a pithy brand that copies the Wendy's tone, right? I thought that was really cool to watch how Wendy's sort of transformed. Same thing with Chili's, for instance. They created this, persona that was a Chili's persona. And I think they're scared of falling flat into the void. And what happens a lot of times at these big brands, I think, is it's all about, and it used to be the same in finance, it was career protectionism. So, I just don't want to get fired, and I won't get fired if I do something kind of normal, but I'll definitely get fired if this goes sideways. And, in this day and age, though, the cool part is like a marketing person who takes a huge swing and whiffs and gets fired should immediately go onto Twitter and say, I got fired for trying this crazy campaign. Here's what I was thinking. Here's 4 other things I wanted to try instead, and like reframe that story entirely so you own it. That's at least what I would do. And that's, I think, what we're going to do with our brand is mess around in that way. I remember I was in finance at the time, and I was just starting to become a little bit more public. And I had a couple partners that were like, we feel uncomfortable with you being public online. We want to be in the shadows. We don't want anybody to know about us. And I was like, that just doesn't work for me. I don't want to get rich quietly. I want to get rich together. And that seems a lot more intriguing to me, not to mention long-term sustainable. And so that's sort of how we played the game.
It's so interesting, too, because you could easily make the argument that everything falling flat on its face, if you take a risk, is potentially the second best outcome that could possibly happen. The number one would obviously be that it goes viral and everybody thinks it's awesome. But it's actually worse for it to do okay, because you don't learn anything. It happens. People are like, oh, okay. Some people like it. Some people don't. No real reaction. You have no data to back up where you should go next. If it falls flat, I almost consider that a blessing. And I've always enjoyed that in my content creation journey, because it tells me something. Like, it tells me people don't care about that topic. They don't care about that format. Maybe it was the way it was written. Maybe it was just not interesting to that audience whatsoever, but you can start making assumptions and test something else out. And honestly, I totally agree with everything you're saying, that people are just afraid of rejection. I agree with that 100%, but logically it doesn't make sense, because if nobody sees it, you weren't really rejected. Like nobody sees it. You're off the hook. Nobody thinks anything of it. So just go do the next thing, and nobody's going to think twice, which loops again to a principle that you talked about earlier on, the very beginning, that none of this, like, it doesn't really matter. You have a lot of runway to just do stuff and see how it goes. And if you learn from it, then you're going to be ahead of 99% of the people out there.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. The other thing that's fun about content is, it's a very low capex opportunity. You don't have to spend a bunch of money and build a stadium or, go through a bunch of product iterations. Like the platforms already exist. You basically play some games with either words, video, photo format. Most things that you do shouldn't cost you much money. We're not talking about the huge ad spend of old that went into video programming. I mean, what Coinbase did for the Super Bowl was a perfect example. Like minimal viable product. People increasingly want authenticity in the things that they engage with because everything has so many veneers and filters. And so you have a very low risk monetarily, from a monetary perspective, way to test the growth of your product or business. And I can't think of something better. I mean, every business is a marketing business. Every business is a sales business. And so if you can figure out how to hack virality of audience, it's just a different way to apply leverage to your company instead of, let's say, just going and raising more capital and spending more on paid ads, for instance.
For the final part here, I want to shift a little bit from the general concept of audience. I want to kind of melt that together with the concept of community and get your thoughts on what the difference is between those two, or maybe how audience leads the community. What are your thoughts on those? Because I think most people feel they're different, but maybe can't explain why.
Sure. The way that I define community is if you have not bought something from us, you are not fully a part of our community yet. You have not fully engaged or bought in. Now, bought might be buying something for $2. It doesn't matter from a revenue perspective, but I don't feel like we've done our job of bringing you into our ecosystem if you don't think that our content is good enough to actually pay for. And so until that moment, I value that audience less. The audience that I value super highly is the audience that has purchased something from us in some way, shape, or form. I think that's one of the reasons why books are really helpful, because they're a very low dollar way to see if people are super interested in your ideas. And so the audience that has purchased something from us, we are increasingly obsessed on thinking about how do we take up more mind share for them? How do we engage with them further? And how do we make it a net win for them to purchase things from us? And so, I'm really intrigued. Largely, I could care less about Web3. I think there's plenty of people that are obsessing on that every single day. I don't need to add my voice to the chorus. That said, one of the areas where I think it is intriguing is how could it make people more money or give people more time or derive more value for them to engage with something of ours or buy something than ours than it would to not. And I think never before have we had so many ways for that to happen. We used to just take people's data from them as companies and aggregate it and sell to other people. How could we instead take data from them, package it up, and give it back to them in a way that is valuable? And so that's the area that I'm sort of obsessing on lately, is how could it become really this net benefit continuously to be part of my community? And I'm not necessarily talking about NFTs because I've never done any of those things sort of on purpose.
I'm kind of on the same boat with you with the Web3 stuff. I don't think I'm qualified to talk on any of that, but it is an interesting concept because in my eyes, an audience is a lot easier to build than a community. It's a lot lower touch, whereas with a community, you really have to be engaged on it, and you have to be very serious about building a community and staying there if you want it to work. Because I built some before where it just wasn't as engaging as I thought, and I wasn't as into it as I thought, and it goes sideways very quickly. Do you have any tips, I guess, for when you're looking at your audience and you're trying to find the right people that might fit into that community? Are there signs for you that you look for? Like, okay, I kind of know of this group of people. This is who's likely to pay for things, which again, going back to that point also shows your consistency across the board because it feeds back into the principle of cash that you spoke to before. That's one of the key pillars in building. But yeah, how are there identifiers for you of who's going to be a good fit for the community, who's likely to purchase?
Yeah, I mean, the people that are likely to purchase from us usually engage with our content at a pretty high level. So something from 7 to 12 touches they've had of our content before they purchase. These are typically people who open the newsletter at least once out of the 4 we send a month. These are people who they've typically been with us for somewhere around 2 to 6 weeks already until then, which means that they've probably seen a lot more pieces of content than we can track. So these are like highly engaged members of our community. And that's also because we don't sell very many cheap products. I'm sure, I think our cheapest product is like $299. So it's not a small commitment for humans. That said, the other part of the community that I think is intriguing is you'll see them sort of engage with one another. And a lot of these members of our community will be answering questions like in my comment section. So that's a really good way to know that somebody's interested in being a part of what we're doing for a longer term. Also, the cool part about growing a community, and I am like you, Blake, so I'm really good at a couple of things, not that many things, but I'm really good at investing in finance. I've done that for a long time. I think I'm pretty good at it, let's say. I'm quite good at creating content and writing and putting stuff out there into the universe on a consistent basis. Probably not the best content creator, but I'm pretty good at consistency, and I'm pretty good at iterating on consistency, okay? And then the third thing that I'm not so great at is, there are some people that you just meet them and they're, they love community. They love engaging in a community consistently, and they want to answer all the questions, and they want to like teach people one-on-one. That's actually not my strength. I like creating at scale. And so what I've found is I need to have somebody that offsets that. So we have a community manager who's amazing. And we actually have a community manager and then a few people that assist with the communities that we have, like our cash flow community, which is our paid premium newsletter. And that is so important because she's like the mama bear and I'm like the papa bear, and this is like a totally stereotypical female male thing. So excuse me, PC crowd. But basically like, I'm out there like, bringing in the money, I'm bringing in like the big ideas. And then we got Della that like nurtures them and takes care of them inside of our framework. And I think that's really important to understand for you as a creator, like, what are you good at? And don't do the things that you're not good at. Bring in other people to do it. Mr. Beast does not write a blog. Why? He's not that good at that. Everything's off the cuff. Mr. Beast also doesn't have a community. Why? Because he's kind of a nerd and, I would imagine sort of, he's not what is that called? He's not like externally validated.
Right.
He's probably a little bit more into being isolated. And so that wouldn't play to his strengths. And so don't try to do everything that everyone's doing. Pick what drives to your strength and then 10x your commitment to that one strength.
The anti-Gary V. Yeah, just don't be everywhere. I think he's gone away from that a little bit, but well, I've certainly learned a ton. I really appreciate you coming on. My last question really is, after everything we've talked about, specifically finding an audience, kind of building an audience as well, is there anything we left out that you think would be valuable to patch in here?
One thing I leave people with is, pay attention to platforms. In my opinion, each platform is like a mistress. So you cannot give the same things to each one of your mistresses. Like some like chocolates, some like trips, some like candies, some like attention, whatever the case may be. And so you need to think about the platforms like they have a personality. When I screwed up a lot, it was when I treated TikTok like Twitter and Twitter like TikTok. If I go to Twitter and I tell them the things I write on TikTok, they're going to think I'm dumb, don't know what I'm talking about, and too low level. If I go to TikTok and speak the way I do at Twitter, they're going to not understand me, not be engaged, and the stuff is not going to go viral or land. And so what you have to do is actually think about it like you would a politician. It's from a psychological standpoint. TikTok is, the young ADHD teenager that hasn't done a ton from the business perspective. Gross generalization, but true. Twitter is like your, tech bro obsessed with Elon Musk, super into startups and fundraising, right? And so if you understand those two different segments, and then you can speak at their level. When I go to speak to my friends that are in startup land, building businesses all the time, I'm going to speak one way. I'm going to say, I just raised, $5 million with one email in order to invest in the infrastructure of boring businesses. Here's how. If I'm going to say that same thing on TikTok, I'm going to say, here's how you can use email to make you money, right? And I'm going to use that voice to TikTok because I'm explaining it to, in my mind, my cousin Wyatt, who's, 18 years old and wants to be an entrepreneur but hasn't done anything before, as opposed to my friend Sam, who sold his company for $30 million. And so treat platforms appropriately, just like you would not speak the same to your dad as you would to your 12-year-old niece.
I love it. Contextual to the platform. let's give you a chance here at the end. So again, this is Codie Sanchez from Contrarian Thinking. I want to give you a chance to talk about what you're working on now and where people can find you online, also where they can find Contrarian Thinking.
Yeah, well, for this audience, I think the thing that would be most useful to y'all is probably contrarianthinking.co. You can go and check out our newsletter course. It's basically it's how to grow your audience across all platforms and then how to monetize it to your first $1 million and 100,000 subscribers. And I talk about newsletters because ultimately on any of these platforms, I mean, my friend Alex Hormozy, he's had his Instagram turned off for like the last week and a half, and he was just about to hit 300,000 subscribers on Instagram. And so if you build on one platform, I think you're asking for future pain. So I like to make sure no matter where you're building, capture the emails, get the emails, no matter what, because you own that. That is the only place where you own your audience. And so I did a course on basically how we grew our newsletter list, because I think everybody should do that base level. And I think it's cheap. It's like $390 or something like that. So I would go there. And then if you want our free stuff, but we talk about lots of different things on freeing minds and building bank accounts, that's contrarianthinking.co. I would go sign up for that email newsletter, completely free. There's like 102 different episodes, and a bunch of those are related to building content and audience businesses.
Codie Sanchez, again, thank you so much for coming on and for teaching us all about audiences. And hopefully we'll get big enough we can have you back on again and we can do a follow-up here.
Sounds like a plan, man. Thanks for having me, Blake.